Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jo Haig, and I am the Chief Executive of OnBoarding Officers. And with me today is David Shoesmith of the Universal Defence and Security Solutions. And we're delighted for you to join us today. David and I, neither of us mind about you asking questions as you go along. So please feel free to put things in the chat box and we will either take them as we go along or answer them at the end, whatever seems appropriate at the time. Also, if you want to find out more about any of the things that we've talked about today, you'll be able to speak to us directly through our website, or you'll find telephone numbers at the end of this slide set. We are also recording this, so if you wanted to listen to anything later, we'll make sure that it's available for interested parties, so just let us know. So thank you very much. I hope you're enjoying this gorgeous sunny weather, and we're delighted to tell you about the services that our organisations can possibly provide for those of you moving through a transition period of your career into a new exciting career post your service. The particular areas that we wanted to talk about today from onboarding officers, and I'll explain in a moment what we do, is about considering boardroom appointments, and those would be as a non-executive director, so to sort of build up a portfolio career, which fits in very nicely with the things that David's going to talk to you about, which is actually about taking up consultancy roles. Just to share with you my own experience, and I've been doing this sort of work in the boardroom for 30 plus years. Many of those appointments has started as a consultancy role. In fact, my whole business was started around the model of being a consultant and working in a business, and then they may well ask me to join the board as a result of that. So if we could go on to the second slide, Nick. Onboarding Officers, it's a business that I formed some 3 years ago. It's one of my businesses. The other business I have is called the FDS Group, and that is a corporate finance business, and that means we help people buy and sell their companies, and we also provide non-executive directors into companies. The Onboarding Officers business was formed specifically to hone into the military community and to help harness the amazing talent that sits in those organisations, whichever part of the military you are, and help those amazing people actually join the commercial boardrooms, because it seemed to me that there is a huge talent gap. And one of the things that everybody is telling me now is how difficult it is to find the right people to fit the right jobs. And I think there is a massive opportunity for military personnel to join the boardrooms of the UK and indeed beyond. And so I set this business up specifically to help those individuals. And David will tell you a little bit about his business when he joins me later on. So we're going to talk about the role of the non-executive director, and that will be for me to discuss with you what that is. And then David is going to talk about the role of the consultant. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have some time for a Q&A. But please don't be worried about dropping chat questions into the box as we go along. So if we could go on to the next slide, so just a little bit of an elaboration of what I've been telling you. So I started my business some 32 years ago. That's the FDS business. And then Onboarding Officers is going to be 3 years old this year. In terms of myself, I've won quite a few awards. In fact, I'm here running an event today up in Rugby for Vistage, which is the UK's biggest chief exec organisation, and I've been speaking to them today actually about buying and selling businesses. As you can see, I've won a few awards, including the Sunday Times Non-Exec Director of the Year. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, this doesn't make me any better than anybody that's listening to this. It simply means that I happen to be in the running for it, and there's absolutely no reason why you, ladies and gentlemen, shouldn't be there in the future. I currently hold 7 positions as a non-exec chair in a huge variety of businesses. I mean, literally everything from research for the pharma industry to waste management business and everything in between. And over my career, I've held about 40 different non-execs. So the organization is built on a lot of practical experience. I regularly speak on corporate governance and on basically buying and selling businesses and finance. And as you can see, I've written a few books, all available on Google. If you buy them, I get all of 6 pence, so please have a look. The ones that you might find particularly interesting there are how to be a world-class non-exec director, and perhaps in relation to the things Davey's going to talk to you about, the Entrepreneur's Guide to Starting a New Business. Ladies and gentlemen, I wrote that in lockdown 1 on the basis that I thought the world was going to change, and at the end of this pandemic, there would be a lot of people come out of business and decide either they want to work for themselves or they definitely don't want to carry on doing what they're doing. And I've proved to be the case. So you might find those interesting. There's a lot of practical tips in there. So if we can just go on to the next slide, Nikki, please. So in terms of what onboarding officers is, and please do look at our website, we'll give you the link at this. We only allow military officers to join this community. So it's not for the civilian population. And that's important because everything we do is geared to understanding how to translate the military skills into the commercial world. And we've had some fantastic successes with this. We've had people who were really amazing in their job in the military and didn't believe that they had the skill set to sit in boards, and yet they've actually picked up some wonderful opportunities. And so that is our main objective, is to help translate those two worlds into one world that can speak the same. How does it work? It is a community, so it's much more than just a training program. We do start with what we call an insight program, and if you like, it's an accelerated look into what it means to be a director and to give you those sorts of skill sets that you need to move into this possibly seemingly strange world. So we cover things like what it means to be a non-exec director. What does that world feel like? What does it look like in a boardroom? What would you be expected to do? And of course, we also cover how to get into the boardroom. So what your CV should look like, what your social media presence should look like, how to decide which businesses are of interest to you and why they should be interested in you. We then do a section on finance, and sort of colloquially, I tend to call it finance for the terrified. So I'm sure some of you are used to holding huge budgets, but you're possibly less familiar with balance sheets and cash flows than you need to be as a non-executive. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to be a qualified finance director. You certainly don't. Excuse me. I do beg your pardon, everybody. Just one moment, please. See, that's a speaker's nightmare. So anyway, and the third module, ladies and gentlemen, is on marketing. Again, something that you're probably not over familiar with. We've also been very proud to be finalists in a couple of initiatives. One was the Ex-Forces Business Awards, and we've just heard we're a finalist again this year, and in the 21 Northern Leadership Awards. So we're definitely getting known. But as I said, we're so much more than just an insight program. In our organisation, we've gathered together what we call our allies. Those include ambassadors. Now, ambassadors are people like yourselves who are ex-military, who have transitioned into this arena of the commercial world. So these are people, if you like, buddies that you can talk to about how they've done it, the problems that they've had. And then we have what we call our super neds, and these are non-military people who have made a career sitting in different boardrooms, if you like, a portfolio career. And then we have some fantastic partners, and these range from DAC Beechcroft, who are a Magic Circle law firm, to Vistage, who I've mentioned earlier, who are the world's biggest chief executive organisation. These are people who are here to provide you an insight into a world that perhaps you're less familiar with, and to be there to support you through this journey. We also have some very exclusive opportunities, and that is for you to actually sit in boardrooms and observe what actually goes on. That can be a real privilege, because obviously most board meetings are extremely private. We also, whilst we're not a recruitment agency, we have brought to the attention of many of our alumni opportunities that just are not in the public domain. And we would hope to continue doing that. We take no fee for this sort of thing. It's all about introducing you into the right area, and we would help, if you wish, with pre-calls with yourself about what is likely to happen in that interview. So we've got a fantastic contact base and networking opportunities. And of course, it doesn't stop when you've been through all this journey with us. This is a lifelong journey. So if you wanted to talk to any of our allies, they're all available to help and support you. So after that coughing fit, I hope it doesn't too much of a disturbance for you. I'm going to hand you over to David now. Thank you so much, everybody. We will be following this up towards the end of this session. But David, over to you.
Thanks very much indeed, Jo. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to have a flick through life as a consultant, having left the military. I won't dwell too much on what I've done, but I left about 13 years ago. I was ACDS log ops in the MOD, and logistics on ops, and the whole support business was my career, with a view into acquisition and increasingly about how defence can get better value out of its support solutions. So that, in effect, was my springboard into the consultancy business. I left to join a medium-sized consultancy, US consultancy called PRTM, who made a bit of a name for themselves in pioneering availability contracting and a few other related things. So it was a kind of natural adjacent step for me to take to work with them. But from that, I then took another several adjacent steps and got into strategic supply chain stuff and critical program management and all sorts of things, both within the defence sector and beyond. So it is possible to build quite a thriving career as a consultant. And what I want to do is just run through some of the sort of consulting models that are out there and some of the pros and cons of those consulting models. Not to say which one, if any, is the right one, that may or may not suit you. It's a career that you're looking to go into. But just to give you a little bit more of an insight into what's good and what's less good in the consulting world. Next one, Nikki, please. So a little bit on UDSS. Many of you will have heard of UDSS. We are a defence consultancy, a global defence consultancy, predominantly UK. We have a number of overseas officers who are also part of our network. So Germans, Canadians, Americans, the odd Australian, even a normal Australian. We also have civil servants and those whose careers have been in either law enforcement or security services. Overwhelmingly, we're military, so soldiers, sailors, and airfolk. And what do we do? Well, the founding mission of the organisation was really to provide spare capacity to the MOD to give policy, strategy, operational advice, and implementation teams into foreign governments to fill a gap between the demand that we knew was out there from overseas governments in particular, and the supply that the MOD was able to provide either through individuals or units, Defence Academy or whatever. So we pitched ourselves as spare capacity, and indeed we have the last year or so started to do a reasonable amount of work with overseas governments around professional military education in particular, reviews of a few different things. And we have a number of other potential engagements ongoing with a number of other countries. We retain a close relationship with the MOD. And those of you that are in the MOD and have experience of the commercial aspects of the MOD are not necessarily fast moving when it comes to innovative business models. They're reluctant to perhaps lend over support to one company over another company. But nonetheless, we continue to work closely into the centre of the MOD to make sure that they're appraised of what we're up to, what we're thinking of, and to make sure that we're aligned with whatever it is that they're trying to do. Clearly, the last 3 or 4 months post-Ukraine has seen a preoccupation with what's going on there, but that doesn't mean that the UK doesn't seek to maintain and indeed develop relationships with a whole load of other countries, but just lack the capacity to be able to do so. So we're, in a sense, fending for ourselves in building our G2G business activity, not quite G2G, but it's UDSS to G, if you like. We also face into the commercial sector. So we support them in offering advice on their own sort of strategy, particularly defence strategy, UK and overseas. But we also have some offers that play to, I suppose, our collective strengths in sort of leadership, contingency, planning and operations. Now we need to do that with a relatively light military touch, but the core of what we learn as military leaders holds good in business as well, particularly in a fast-moving environment where you've got to make decisions on a sort of contingency basis. And I would remark that it's relatively easy for businesses to look at yesterday's sales data or manufacturing data, production data, whatever, and make decisions on yesterday. But what perhaps they're less good at is looking over the horizon and spotting what they need to make adjustments for and then making those adjustments. That's not a criticism. It's a characteristic, I think, of the commercial world. Whereas, of course, in the military world, we're constantly looking over the horizon, constantly trying to strategize. So there's an offer here that UDSS make into the commercial world to help them understand the world of strategy and contingency preparations. Not entirely as the military does it, but with a military flavour to it. So 2 parts of the business, one sort of G2G stuff, one into the commercial world. We've got about 500 people on our books at the moment. So if you are interested in joining us, then very happy to follow up with an individual conversation after this session. We're always looking for people, whether they be warfare officers, whether they be logisticians, whether they be communicators or engineers. We're really keen to keep our level of expertise and currency with what's going on in the military up to date. But more than that, we are keen to have folks who are really keen to develop themselves as sort of consultants, perhaps in a portfolio type career. So please, let's have a chat afterwards, and we'll see if UDSS is for you. Next one, Nikki, please.
I think it's back now, actually, David.
It's back to you, Jo.
When David and I first met, and you'll be glad to hear I've stopped coughing. When David and I first met, we realised actually that there was a lot of overlapping skills between being a non-exec director and being a consultant. And I mentioned earlier that actually my own journey started as a consultant. I think it might be helpful for those of you who are less familiar with the commercial setup to understand exactly what a non-executive director is. So every company in the UK and the companies that you may work with, either through David or through any other organisation, they have to have a board. Of course, that board in a small to medium-sized business only needs to be one person, but in sort of more modest-sized businesses, it's, you may have 2 or 3 directors, and there are basically 2 main categories of directors. There are executive directors; those are people who have jobs, day-to-day functional roles. And then there are non-executive directors. So a non-executive director has no specific functional responsibility. You're not looking after a department as such. So you're not working in the business on a day-to-day basis. You may be going in for board meetings once a month, or you may be perhaps going in and coaching the CEO or another member of the board as part of the role. but you're not a member of, if you like, the executive team who are running the business on a day-to-day basis. So what our experience has shown, and I speak personally as well as professionally for other people, is that a good non-exec are chosen because of their experience and their knowledge. It can be in a particular field or industry, or it can just be somebody who has got experience of life, if you like, can bring a different experience to a particular issue. And the things I think that the military personnel can bring to this is a completely different view of thinking about problems. That was very much demonstrated through the pandemic, where a lot of us civilians were suddenly hit by issues that we had never encountered before, never even dreamed about. And many of the companies I worked with, those directors went into panic mode. One of the things I think that you as a military officer can bring to this is calm, rationality, and perhaps a different way of resolving problems. And certainly the people that are part of our alumni are repeating that back to me and saying that is actually what the boards they join are really enjoying as part of it. So whether you join a board as an executive director and you take on a functional role, whether that be, head of strategy or head of operations or whatever, as a non-exec director, when you sit down in the boardroom, you still have one vote. It doesn't matter whether you're running a function or whether you're a shareholder. So you do have a major part to play in the running of the business. And it can be very exciting, because particularly if you get a number of posts, every day can bring a new challenge. And I have found, and I say this in all honesty, that I will go to a meeting, learn something from the exec team that are actually trying to resolve an issue, go to the board meeting of another company on another day and suggest that may be a resolution. So it's very exciting because you're learning and passing on that information as you go through each month's meetings. So if we go to the next slide, Nikki. So what is your actual role? So I would say the major role is to provide this independent oversight and to remind the board what they are there for, and bringing in this broader experience and perspective to crisis, to strategic decisions, through to reimagining the business, which is certainly something that's happening very much at the moment because of the pandemic and the war in the Ukraine, and now the crisis that we're all facing due to energy and cost of living. And so it is, lots of businesses are having to really rethink their business, and a great Ned is wonderful at doing that and just providing constructive criticism to executive proposals. That's not about pulling those ideas apart. So while as a consultant you may be coming up with a solution to a particular problem, as a non-exec, you don't necessarily have to come up with that solution, although of course that could be something you could do, but it's more about saying, well, my experience shows this may work better, or have we thought about doing it a different way? Also, different from a consultant, you are not part of that implementation team. You are just there to make sure it happens. That's not to say it doesn't come with lots of risks, because it does, but you're not actually an operational role. So much of your role is about providing this support, contacts, suggestions, mentoring, coaching, etc. When I look at what skill sets make a Ned, I mean, some of these would equally fit with being a consultant, but certainly a good sense of humour. And it's certainly been my experience dealing with our alumni through this last 3 years that I've yet to meet somebody in the military who hasn't had to develop a sense of humour to deal with some of the extraordinary experiences that you've gone through. Equally, being a realist. As an entrepreneur, and I like to think I am an entrepreneur, I can have 12 crazy ideas before breakfast, a little bit like Alice in Wonderland. And sometimes you need somebody around that boardroom who says, this is fantastic, Joe, but perhaps we should rethink this in a more pragmatic and perhaps realistic manner. You've also got to be a great communicator. Again, a fantastic skill that military has, and at all levels. It's no good just being able to talk to the chair or the board members. You've got to be able to talk to everybody in that organisation. I make a real thing about when I'm joining a board of getting to know everybody, particularly including the executive assistant of the chief exec. That's a very important relationship. And of course, this just providing calm and a steering hand in a crisis, things that are second nature because of your background and training. But believe me, they're not second nature to those of us who've just come from a standard commercial background. Okay, so if we go on to the next the next slide, please. And what are the challenges? And I'm not going to say this is an easy job, because it's not, but there again, I'm sure there's nobody in this audience who are looking for an easy job. It can be very, very challenging. I think that's what I love about it, actually. I've had 2 board meetings this week, 2 entirely different board meetings. One is a really interesting new retail concept where, believe it or not, they don't sell anything. It's all about experiencing the products. And the other is a healthcare research business. And both of them have got really interesting problems, not least of which is resourcing it. So finding staff being a major, major problem at the moment. But then these businesses are very quick moving, and it's very important for whatever issues you have, and of course we've all got our own issues, to leave them outside the door and be in the room for that board. They're relying on you to help them come to build a better business. There is no doubt the role is mentally challenging. And so whereas a role may say, we just need you 2 days a month or 3 days a month, whatever, believe me, that is not the end of the job. I mean, I was traveling up from London yesterday, and I was still looking at what we talked about, writing reports about how we could deal with certain situations, up till arriving at my hotel at 8 o'clock last night. So it can be very mentally demanding, but that's fun. That's the really fun thing about it. And so you've definitely got to have a thick skin. You've got to be able to stand up and be counted. You're sometimes saying things that nobody else wants to hear. They said to me yesterday, Jo, you don't hold anything back, do you? You certainly say it as it is. We don't think this person is going to be suitable. Let's get rid of them. Sometimes it's better not to be in the industry because you're tempted to intervene. So again, the military expertise can really help in that area. Go on to the next slide, please. I have to tell you that I don't feel I've actually worked for the last 30 years because I love my job so much. It's really fun. We have a laugh. It's very, very rewarding helping somebody on this journey, but it can be very, very exhausting. But it gives you so much reward when you help either turn a business around or refocus it. All the tools that you've earned along your journey in terms of managing people, managing problems, can massively into play. It can actually be very financially rewarding. If I was to tell you that some of the people that we've helped secure roles, they're earning £2,000–3,000 a day and more for the work that they're doing. So this can be an additional income if you are looking to sort of semi-retire or wind down, or if you get 2 or 3 of these opportunities, it can actually give you a lot of financial resilience while not actually having a full-time job. It gives you access to meet all sorts of really interesting businesses across a huge different sectors of business. I've just mentioned a couple of mine, and that's the joy of working in different businesses. You're never bored. And of course, along this journey, you're building up a wonderful book of contacts. I would say that is probably one of the most valuable things that you will do. So if we go on to the next slide, please. I've mentioned a few of these, but I just would like to just confirm again where I think the military personnel can bring things into the boardroom that are not always available readily from a commercial individual. So definitely this ability to just think differently, challenge in a very different way, make tough decisions, but perhaps with a sensitive approach. You know, I used to say I was like the Duracell bunny, for those that you remember that advertisement, you know, just keep going when other people are perhaps haven't got the same resilience that you have developed. And I certainly believe that military personnel come with an inbuilt gravitas and a diplomatic skill set. And that's very important because you have to make an impression fairly quickly in this role. And you may be surprised to see that says high EQ, not IQ. Emotional intelligence, I think perhaps is one of the most underrated skills for being a world-class NED. And I believe that this audience has got that in spadefuls. So we'll have a look at the next slide, please. How do you get it? Like with anything, you know, and it's like getting any job, whether it be a consultancy job or whether it be an executive post, it's not just who you know, it's who knows you. And that's why we built this whole community. These are people in our community that we've called our allies, who have been doing this for decades, and they are there to help you. And we're very good at sort of pointing you in the right direction and then supporting you as you get to the next step. Certainly you have to have the right CV, and some of the CVs that I've looked at for our alumni are completely inappropriate for a non-exec role. They're not interested in your GCSEs and professional qualifications. They're interested in what you've done and how you've resolved certain issues. Also, perhaps a little bit alien to some of this audience is that it's very important that you have a social media presence. And one of the things that we talk about is becoming a thought leader. Look at what you are great at and start blogging and vlogging about that, so that you become the person that the industry would turn to for a particular skill set. We also encourage you to consider, first of all, going for voluntary roles, because you get a lot of experience. Because although some of you may say, well, I've never sat in a boardroom, you have. You just call it a command room. It's the same forum. And you know, this community that we've created will help you move from those voluntary roles where you can say, yes, I have actually sat on what we might call a more traditional board position, and we've actually got that skill set now, and therefore I'm now available perhaps to do a paid role. And we are there to help you, take you through that particular part of the journey. Okay, David, back to you.
Thanks, Jo. So I'm just going to have a romp through different types of consultancies and pros and cons, as I said earlier. And I think it's striking how much there are sort of common terms and common characteristics about some things I'm about to say with what Jo has already said. Certainly there's almost a continuum, or almost sort of concentric circles. So, you know, the board, non-execs, and then as you go out another concentric circle, you get into this sort of advisory space. And that migration from advisory into boardroom is not that difficult. But obviously you've got to position yourself first. So what I've done is broken the consultancy and advisory space into 4 blobs effectively, and they're shown here. The established consultancies, the go it alone, the small team, and the associate model. And there aren't really hard boundaries around all these. They sort of blend from one into the other. But I'll run through some of the pros and cons of each. Next one, Nikki, please. So established consultancy. So, you know, everything from the big 4, Deloitte and the PwCs of this world, down to some of the smaller, more specialist organisations, perhaps the Turner and Townsends of this world. What's good? Well, generally speaking, they're well paid. They have good bonuses. I'm not going to tell you how much. I mean, I, broadly speaking, trebled my salary when I left the MOD as a 2-star, and chuck in on bonuses on top. So it's well paid. If you look at PwC's partner remuneration this year, just north of £1 million. You are unlikely to hit that in the first couple of years, but it's it's an industry for which there is a very high margin. There is usually plenty of money to invest in newcomers. It's not all going to go to you, but it is. It's not a sort of an industry, generally speaking, that runs on really tight margins. Other advantages of going for an established consultancy, there's definitely the opportunity to learn new skills, but it's not necessarily just going to come to you. So most of the large consultancies have, if you like, a pocket full of estimate frameworks, which they throw at different problems, and various ways of analysing different problems. So you do have the opportunity to build up a portfolio of analytical frameworks, if you like, and approaches to cracking different business problems. You also have the opportunity to grow away from the defence sector. You probably need to be under no illusions that any of the big consultancies in particular is going to hire you for what you have been, and for that big fat military address book and contact space that you have. But if you fight for it, you can broaden beyond defence and take some of your generic skills, whether they're in leadership, whether they're in crisis management, whether in communications, whatever they might happen to be, and you can start to look to apply those skills and experience into non-defence sectors. It's a big advantage of being in one of the established consultancies. What goes with that clearly is a new work network, not just of clients, but of work colleagues. You get an easy way to learn the realities of the commercial world. The big consultancies, they have a rate card, they have a margin they have to hit. You become familiar with the cost of time, not least your own time, which is not usually high up the list in a defence setting, by getting into the utilisation criteria that you're usually required to conform to. So it's a good way to learn how to cost your time and the value of your time that clients are buying. As mentioned, the sort of knowledge and intellectual property bank in terms of analytical frameworks and the like. The people that you work with, generally speaking, there are some fearsomely bright people, particularly at the more senior ends and particularly at the more junior ends. I have to say, I would comment that there's a lot of permafrost between those two extremes, and they're not always the most stellar performers, which can be something of a disappointment when you're used to working amongst highly motivated and culturally consistent colleagues that you have in the military. But there's some really bright people that it's a privilege to work with in the big consultancies. And the brand value of some of the established consultancies is not to be overlooked, because it does scoop in some really interesting clients and some really interesting work with some really interesting problems. So not to overlook the brand value. Nikki, next one, please. So what might the challenges be? Well, it's blooming hard work. Certainly from, I just remember when I made the move, I thought I worked reasonably hard as a 2-star, trying to sustain 2 operations and trying to put support higher up the agenda in the acquisition space, as well as working with allies and partners. And then I joined this consultancy, and I had to learn a whole new vocabulary, had to learn a whole new way of doing things. And I had to learn that there weren't a whole lot of staff around to help me. So in terms of the number of hours that you put in, it's seriously hard work. You have to address some cultural differences. Working in a military environment, generally speaking, the level of trust, the level of integrity, the understanding of you saying something and who you're talking to taking away the same meaning is pretty consistent. Not necessarily the same applies when you move to commercial space, and that doesn't just apply to consultancies, it applies across the board. If you're a little bit older, i.e. probably 1-star and above, late 40s, early 50s, it's a challenge getting on in an established consultancy, because most of your colleagues at director or partner level will have been in the business for a while. They'll have an internal network and a client network, and you're starting from scratch. And that can be a challenge when you're trying to develop a second career. I mentioned about a new language. I mean, it's amazing the vocabulary that other people use and the different communication skills. Generally speaking, I think military are pretty good, provided you don't bark too loudly. And you also have to accept that sometimes people are a bit intimidated by working with people from the military environment, because there is this sort of caricature of the military approach to things, which is actually rarely fair in this day and age. But nonetheless, you have to perhaps overcompensate to avoid perceptions of being too military, and deal with the frustrations perhaps of people talking endlessly instead of just getting on with the job. There's no doubt that your own contacts and your own experience and your own knowledge will be relentlessly mined. I've used the word mined rather than exploited when it comes to big consultancies. They're absolutely clear-eyed in what they're buying when they hire you. They'll pay you a load of money, but they expect you to return the compliment by being open about your contacts and your experience and how to do stuff. It can be a bit of a shock for ex-military folks to suddenly be presented with annual revenue and utilization targets. I mentioned those before. It's a good way of learning, but when you're suddenly presented, perhaps with your revenue generation expectation in year 1 is £1 million, and in year 2 it's £3 million, and you've never had to do that before, it can be quite an adventure. And the last thing I'd say in terms of challenges, and it sort of goes to the previous bullet about sort of a glass ceiling for older entrants. You really do need a trusted sponsor, mentor, to guide you through the realities of how some of these organizations work. Big organizations, big consultancies are really just a collection of 300 or 400 small businesses under a single brand, because each partner is competing fiercely for what's out there. And you need to understand that, and you need to have someone help you understand who has influence, who hasn't, who will work with you, who won't, and who will just help you navigate all those challenges in the early days. And chances are, if someone's going to try to attract you into their company, that you'll have that sponsor or mentor. But they absolutely need to be trusted, and they absolutely need to be held on to feel comfortable that you're self-sufficient. Next one, Nikki, please. So that's the established consultancies. Let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum. So this is the go it alone model, which some of you may well be considering. So it's good because you're your own boss. It's fantastic because you're your own boss. You eat what you kill. You get all the earnings. You don't have to carve off a margin for a host consultancy. You don't have to feel like you're subsidizing the rest of the business. What you kill, what you earn, is a direct result of your own efforts. So it's quite satisfying in that respect. You have the opportunity to exploit your career knowledge and experience. It doesn't go to others, and it's a good route to take that first step out if you build your own little consultancy on what you know, whether it's it could be digital, it could be support, it could be anything, and many people do that. And the last thing is you choose what to do when you don't want to do it. So you want to go and sit in the south of France for a month, that's absolutely fine.
David, if I may interrupt a minute, David, just for anybody that's thinking they want to go it alone, on the book that I wrote about how to be an entrepreneur, there's a whole section on how to set up a business, the different types of models, from partnerships to limited companies to not-for-profit businesses, and what are the pros and cons of it, and what you need to do from a revenue point of view. So please feel free to have a look at that.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. Next one, Nikki, please. So some of the challenges of going it alone, again, it can be hard work. If you've got some financial targets that you're looking for, or got a huge mortgage that you need to service, be prepared to work. It's hugely hard. Value and pricing conversations don't come easily. This is certainly something that I know Joe talks a lot about. People that have been brought up in the military, generally speaking, don't have to lock horns with people over how much they're worth. And there tends to be a sort of a diffidence amongst the ex-military folks in understanding their value and therefore what they should charge out at. The work can be spiky. The tendency may be to take everything that is offered to you for fear of falling into famine. You therefore lack a little bit of resilience when it comes to spikes, and you can find yourself working probably much harder than you thought you wanted to. Now you'll get paid for it, but it can present a different set of challenges compared to sort of hard work as part of a team in the military. It can be difficult to break out of that previous experience and knowledge base. You can become a one-trick pony. On the one hand, it's good because it gives you a natural progression from the military into the go-it-alone consultancy field. On the other hand, it makes it a bit difficult to kind of spread your bets and pick up new skills and sell new things. And that lack of career growth can be a bit frustrating. I think going around the same boy doing the same old stuff can be a bit dispiriting. And I've also mentioned tax. Joe's talked about some stuff that's in her book. The incentive to work hard if you're the recipient of a generous military pension can be blunted somewhat by the realization of the tax liabilities. Also, you have no corporate benefits, most of which are taxable as well, of course, but again, it's a factor just to bear in mind.
Just before you go to the next slide, David, I just want to throw in one of the best pieces of advice I ever had when I set up my business, and I did go it alone, as many people do to begin with, is when you write your first invoice, make sure that the terms on your invoice say payment on receipt, because most people give 30 days, which means you cannot chase that invoice for 30 days. And my experience over, 3 decades is she who shouts loudest gets paid first. So if you mark your invoice payment on receipt, after 2 or 3 days, you can ring up and start shouting for your money, because cash is hugely important in that first year, as David's alluded to. Famine and feast will become the norm. And if you have got to chase cash down, then it's important that you've got the right to do that. I just wanted to add that because that's probably the best piece of advice I was ever gave when I set up my business, David.
Yeah, good point. Next one, Nikki, please. So just rattle through these. So that's the go-it-alone. So what's the next one up? So small team. Clearly, with a small team, there's a built-in resilience, a bit of a hunting network that starts to develop, and indeed a bit of additional capacity to deliver on work and on projects. Perhaps some of your mates have different skills, so you can offer a broader skill base into the market. It's good to work with people that you trust and you recognize, and you can assess their contribution and their skills. I have to say that's one of the pleasures of working with UDSS. You know who you're working with, and they make for relatively easy working relationships compared perhaps to other partners that you might come across. You can share and you can gain from each other's experience, and clearly there's an opportunity to share some costs, investments, and indeed some risks. Next one, Nikki, please. It's hard work amongst the challenges. Again, quite tricky to move from an initial client base, break into other markets. Again, you could be stuck with a one-trick pony, or maybe the 2 or 3 trick ponies, depending how many people you're working with. Again, likely to be little career growth. So being able to increase your rates, being able to go on to more intellectually, perhaps more strategic stuff can be challenging. And growing that business beyond that initial client base can be a challenge. You're not going to have the brand value associated with an established consultancy. If you do, it's likely to take you quite some time to get it. So it's not going to be there at the outset. There is a risk that you can fall out with your mates. That's possible wherever you are, of course. But But when you work for a big company like the MOD, you do have shared objectives and values. There is the risk once you've moved outside that envelope that objectives and values diverge over time. But again, still, even as a small team, there's probably a reluctance to turn down opportunities. So again, you get into the feast and famine scenario. Next one, Nikki, please. And then the last one. So I've called this the associate model. So there are different manifestations of this. So many of the established consultancies run networks of associates. So you're not on the payroll, but you're on the address book. So when they need someone to do something specific, they'll give you a call and you come along. Has a lot to commend it. You remain your own boss. It is compatible with the go it alone model. So if you want to head to the south of France or head to your greenhouse to polish tomatoes, whatever else it is that you might want to do, you can do that as part of the associate model. And as an associate, you may well get access to a range of opportunities that you wouldn't necessarily get either go it alone or as a small group. You may have confidence that certainly if you're an associate over a relatively short period of time, that there are enough opportunities that arise that will give you confidence to say no to someone at work because you want to do other things. You may pick up some new skills working with some other associates, and of course you can choose what you do and what you don't do. There's a disadvantage.
Sorry, David, I just wanted to say on this as well, whilst I set up my own go it alone model and then I started to use associates, another learn for me is make sure you contract properly with your associates, because I found out to my disappointment that what happened is my associates stole the work that I'd brought in that we were all supposed to taking a share of. So you must have a robust associate contract to stop that happening.
Next one, Nikki. I think it's the last one or penultimate one. So what are the challenges with the associate model? You'll surrender a proportion of your fees to the host consultancy. So you might not get the same day rate that you may have got as a go it alone. There is also a risk, of course, that they'll nick your intellectual property or even steal the business. The work might not be what you want to do. Associates perhaps are at risk of being rammed into doing something that it might not quite suit, simply because the host consultancy is desperately trying to fulfill a bit of work for a client. You may end up feeling pressured to do stuff that you're not strictly comfortable with. You might feel that you need to accept work from a host consultancy, because if you turn it down, they might not call again. That really is a case of relationship building with the host consultancy. And perhaps the biggest downside is you don't get any access to the corporate benefits that you would with an established consultancy, particularly around pension, and particularly around bonus. And maybe you consider that's a disincentive. Maybe you won't, but certainly it's a factor to think. Nikki, next one, please. I think, Joe, why don't you do this one? Because I think this is, we have, whether you're going for a net appointment or whether you're going for a consultancy appointment.
I mean, again, my experience is that very, very senior people all the way through, all the officers we dealt with, are terribly self-deprecating, that they don't feel it's important to say what they've done and how they've done it. And I'm very conservative in how they state the amazing achievements that they've done. That is very well suited maybe to the military world. It's not going to get you the roles that you need in business, either as a consultant or as a non-exec director, or indeed as an executive director. You have to be a bit more ballsy than perhaps has been how you've been trained to behave. And don't be afraid of perhaps, maybe overselling yourself, because you're going to have skills that perhaps people in the civilian world just can't imagine being in your shoes. So don't be worried about saying that. One thing I would say is try and avoid too much military language, because as a civilian, we don't understand you in the same way that you don't understand us. And one of the things we do in our program actually is give you this translation guide. But I think it's very important to say what you are able to do. You will certainly gain in confidence the more interviews that you have. And that's why sometimes getting voluntary experience is really helpful. Of course, do the research on the business before you go to these meetings. And there's certainly sufficient resources all over the web. And LinkedIn is a fantastic stalking tool. You may have contacts somewhere in there. Find out about the business so you can speak more confidently about it. I mean, as David's put on here, there is no template, but that's the great thing about consultancy and non-exec work. It's a fantastic, wonderful, exciting journey. And you've stepped into more uncomfortable arenas than anybody you're likely to meet. Share with them those experiences of what you learned from that. And it's something that will benefit them, but also benefit you massively. At OnBoarding, we do practice interviews with you. I mean, I've sat and coached people before they've gone to interviews to say, what are they likely to say? What are the difficult questions? And we go through a whole process of what we call pre-grooming, which is perhaps not the best phrase to use before you go into, this lion's den of a commercial interview, be it for a consultancy role or a non-exec role. So, just go in there. And as Oscar Wilde said, be yourself. You may as well, because everybody else has been taken. So I think the last slide, and thank you so much, David, for that, is just to give you the information, if you could go on to the next slide, of our next programs. So we actually run two types of programs. We run a program for those of you that are looking for this portfolio career, and you'll see the dates there. But we've also realized that there are perhaps a number of people in the community who are actually looking for a more permanent job. So obviously that would be different to the consultancy type roles that David's been talking about. So that would be a functional role sitting around the boardroom. And so those are the two programs. Those are the details. Please feel free to get on the phone. We'll give you as much help and information as necessary. And there's loads of stuff on the website. David, I don't know, do you have a website you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I omitted to put it on here. If you get in touch with me via Nikki or Joe, and I can send you the links. And yeah, I mean, if you just Google www.universal-defence.com, you'll get in touch. But please do get in touch, and I'm very happy to have a one-to-one conversation with anyone who's listening about life in UDSS and more broadly about life in the consultancy business.
So thank you very much, everybody. My apologies for choking. I've been speaking all morning at this event, and obviously I've lost my voice. So please apologise. Please accept my apologies for that. I hope you've got some interesting information from what we've been talking to. Both David and I and Nikki would love to hear from you. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good afternoon. Thank you very much.